Welcome to another editing challenge. This one's going to be a fun one. Love when we have some portraits to edit. And as always, you can follow along and practice your own edit by following the link down below in the description, going to the page where you can access the download and all of that good stuff. If you're watching this in a course, you'll find the photo in the resources of this lesson. This one's shot by Isis Aguilar, and we found this on wesaturate.com. So this is going to be a fun one. And as always, we want to make sure that you're posting your own edits to the Photography and Friends community on this month's thread, which is May 2020. So make sure you search for that hashtag editing challenge post in the group, which is accessible to anyone who's in our photography groups. So we haven't actually had a portrait in a while for one of these editing challenges, so this is going to be quite fun. So with all portraits, my goal is to get the attention onto that person, onto their face, and just to highlight, make sure it pops. So let's go through this edit. So the first thing I'm going to do is crop down. I'm in Lightroom Classic, and I do not like how her head is centered in frame. I'm going to put her eyes more along that upper horizontal line of the thirds, and I'm just going to put a little bit more negative space on her left side or the right side of frame. Something like that looks pretty good. We can also actually maybe punch in just a little bit like so. This has like kind of a nice balance from her head to the flowers down below. Something about her shoulders that's bugging me a little bit. That's a little bit better. We can always adjust the crop later, but this is a good place to start. Next, exposure adjustments. The highlights are completely blown out. You can see in her hair and these flowers. So we can just overall take our exposure slider down and just see, you still see some white there. That means that it's completely overexposed. There's no information there whatsoever. But I do think bringing it down quite a bit, whether with just the highlights or the whites, and getting back some of that information is good. You can see just with the highlights, that brings back a little bit of that information. And I'm actually, just going to bring the overall exposure down just a little bit. We might bring back the exposure up on her face a little bit, but just trying to create a little bit more contrast. We don't want to lose information, so I'm going to actually bring back up the shadows. And by bringing down the blacks, we keep that contrast, which we can also add with an S curve in this tone curve, something like this. See how it's like an S? That's contrasty, but that's not what I'm going to do yet. Sometimes I like to add that at the very end, just to add a bit more contrast. All right, so that's a pretty good place to start with. I'm happy with that for the overall exposure. In terms of the next settings in Lightroom, texture, clarity, dehaze, not going to use any of those for a portrait. Vibrance, saturation, it looks like this, since this was a raw photo, it is a little under saturated, so I'm going to bring up the vibrance just a little bit, which is a more natural way to bring up the saturation of colors for a portrait. It doesn't bring as much of those yellows and oranges in skin tones up. So that's starting to look pretty good. We can always see the before and after with the / key. If I want to bring up some specific color saturations, like make those greens pop a little bit more, maybe the red in her dress, we can go down to the HSL panel, click on saturation, click on the color picker, and then go to that specific color and click and drag up. And you can see that the color I picked in this leaf or the trees in the background had some green, some yellow in it. And again, if we go to her dress right here, click and drag up. You got to be careful with reds though, because see, if I go too far, you can see in her nose and her skin and her hair, it starts to get a little bit wonky. So I might actually just bring up the reds just a little bit here, and then we can do some specific editing or use things like adjustment brushes to bring up specific areas of color as well. But again, I think this is a good place to start. Split toning, gonna leave alone. We've got our noise reduction, sharpening. This is a super sharp image. So that's really good. The focus is like super shallow. You can see that her right eye right here is in focus, her left eye out of focus. That focus is perfect on that eye. That can be a little bit distracting for some, but I think it actually looks pretty good. Noise reduction, there's not much noise in here at all. So we're gonna leave noise reduction as is. Leave off lens corrections, transform, and effects. Maybe a little bit of a vignette we might add later. Again, just focusing the attention on our subject's face, but I think this is a good place to start. And now we're going to get into some more specific adjustments of her face. So I'm going to use a radial filter. So that's that circle right here. Click and drag over her face. Now we're actually selecting what's outside of this circle or oval. Pressing the O key shows that mask overlay, or this button down here. I want to actually select what's inside, so I'm going to click invert, and I'm just going to boost the overall exposure, but also bring back down some of the blacks and shadows to, again, keep that contrast. You can see if I just bring everything up, it starts to look washed out. I don't want that, but I feel like her face is a little bit underexposed. So it's kind of a balance of bringing up exposure, but not losing the natural contrast. Unless you're going for that sort of flat look. You can turn the radial filters off with this little button here, and that's a cool way to just see, just from that last edit, what it looks like before and after. And that's starting to look pretty good. We're gonna go in here, let's click done. Let's go in here and make a couple other just little adjustments. There's no real blemishes we're going to get rid of, but we might want to soften the skin just a little bit. We can do that with our brush. There's actually a preset under effects for soften skins. And there's also soften skin light version too. And you can see what it's doing. So if you don't see these, or if you're using a different editor, but you have a brush where you can decrease things like clarity, or the light version is clarity and texture. We're going to use that light version actually. And then just paint over. We're going to just get in here using the space bar to move around with our move tool. And you can see as I do this, it just softens the skin just a little bit. Now this is not necessary at all, but it's just one style, one way of editing portraits. A common practice for skin. Just most people don't want viewers to see like the inside of their pores. All right, that's looking pretty good. Next, what we're going to do is just highlight some areas of her face with her eyebrows and things like that. Basically doing some dodging and burning. So I'm going to click new. We're going to reset our settings, effects, and you can see that there's different, you got face shadows, face highlights. These are kind of new brushes in the latest versions of Lightroom. Again, you can see what they're doing here, but feel free to create your own brushes as well. You can see what the face highlights is doing. It's increasing the exposure a little bit. So what we're really doing is finding areas of her face to brighten up and then parts to darken. Because she is backlit by the sun, this one's a little bit tough because her face is all kind of one lighting. There's not much contrast, and that's often a good thing, but sometimes you want a little bit more contrast. But we can kind of see here where highlights are. The top of the cheekbone right here. Wow, and that, I don't think I've used this highlights brush. What I'm gonna do is, let's go ahead and decrease our flow and our density for sure, and our auto mask. This will give us sort of a better way. Whoops, let's go back to highlights. When you have your flow and your density down, it's basically like painting on layers of a brush, and it's not going to be as harsh. So her cheekbone right there. underneath her eyes just a little bit, the bridge of her nose, above her eyebrow. It's pretty hard to see what we're doing. Down here on her cheek. Underneath her eyebrow. And then same goes in her hair. You could use a different brush, or you can kind of use the same one just to brush where the highlights are, and then we'll do the opposite where her the darker parts are, just to give a little bit more definition to her hair, something like that. All right, so let's do the same thing new. We're gonna do shadows, and again with our flow pretty far down, we're gonna go over some other areas of her face, like this, her eyebrows. Just give it a little bit more contrast. See how that, as I do that, it does sort of a natural, making those eyebrows a little bit darker. Top of the eye. Now this is a quick edit. There's lots of different things you can do with these. I might do a different brush for her lips as well, but I'm just gonna do a quick one over her lips. And then just the darker part of her cheekbone right here. All right. So just highlighting the highlights and also highlighting the shadows. That's basically what we're doing. So we can turn these on and off, and you can kind of see what's happening. Let's do the hair. I didn't do that with the shadows, so let's just the darker parts of the hair. That's what you're doing. You're looking for dark parts. You're looking for light parts. And this is different than just increasing the contrast. You might be saying, Phil, well, why can't you just create a filter and just increase the contrast? This is a more intelligent way of doing it, and it's going to look better. All right, so that's looking pretty good. All right, so let's go ahead and click new. We're going to add another brush for her eyes, try to make her eyes pop even more. So let's go ahead. There is an iris enhance. So I'm just following using these effects, but you could customize it however you want. Oops, let's go back to iris enhance. And let's press O to see our overlay. So I'm just going to paint over her eye like so. We're actually going to turn our flow up. And actually having auto mask on might be good just as we get close to the edge. Okay, so turn our overlay off, and you can kind of see what this is doing. I'm going to increase the clarity and the sharpness just a little bit, especially because that back eye is a little bit out of focus. I'm going to add a new brush now. We're going to reset all of this. We're just going to make it really small for this pupil, her pupil in the back right here. Boop, right there. And we're going to decrease the exposure. It's hard to see because this button is there, but if we click on another one, or if we click actually out, if we click done, you can see that that was trying to, and maybe we go in there again. That was trying to make her pupil a little bit darker. Let's actually delete that. It's really hard to see what you're doing. So we're selecting there. You can see the mask overlay right there. And oh, I reset these, but basically what we want to do is decrease exposure. Shadows might be a better way to do it. Decrease shadows, and clarity, increase that. Now you don't want it to look super awkward and go crazy, because then her pupil here, actually that might be a good idea to touch up that pupil as well. And that one, that looks pretty good. I might have gone a little bit too much with her left pupil. The next thing we're going to do, again with another brush, click New, reset everything. Kind of make it a little bit bigger. This time I'm just going to not use auto mask. I'm just going to paint over her entire eye. We're just going to try to whiten up the whites of her eyes. So pressing the O, you can see what we're selecting. I'm going to turn range mask on. We're going to select the inside of her eye. Maybe actually luminance mask might be better, and select the highlights. Yeah, if we do that, that looks pretty good. Decrease the smoothness a little bit. Actually, I think maybe the color was better. Yeah, maybe not. I'm just going to go in here and erase her iris. It might have just been easier to take a brush and just brush in the whites of her eyes. Something like that, though, is probably going to do what the trick. If we just increase exposure just a little bit, and then also decrease the saturation. We don't want it to be black and white. Something like that might look pretty good. So if we see the before and after, it's starting to look better. Whoops, sorry about that. Let's do the same kind of thing for her teeth. So with a brush, click New. This one actually has a teeth whitening brush. So we're going to take that one, turn auto mask on, turn our overlay on, hitting the O key, and see, we're going to just make some selections in here in our teeth. Now we don't want this to look like a Colgate commercial, and sometimes that can happen, but this exposure, this saturation looks pretty good. Sometimes it's nice to have some color in teeth, and I don't want it to be completely flat, so we are actually going to bring down the blacks and shadows, just again maintaining that contrast. So it's always a good idea to zoom out, see what it looks like, and also look away from your computer and see what it looks like. That's looking pretty good. Let's do a little bit with her. It's not perfect, but good enough for now. Let's do a little bit with her lips. So I'm going to have a new brush. We're going to paint over her lips. Again, turning on our mask overlay so we can see what we are painting. And this is probably a good one where we can use the color range mask. All right, so now it looks like we put clown lipstick on, but if we choose our range mask for color and we select the color of her lips, it does a pretty good job just selecting her lips. And now we're not leaving that mask overlay on. We are just going to add some magenta, or you can add some color this way, depending on what color you want to add. You can add more of a pink or more of like a reddish orange lipstick, depending on just what you want. Whoops, I always do that. Pressing the V key will toggle on black and white. So lots of brushes there affecting her face, affecting this entire image. Before, after. So looking pretty good. We can see a side-by-side comparison, before and after. Now, what I might do is add a little bit of creativity with focus. So I'm actually going to take a radial filter. We're going to make an oval around her face again. Rotate it just so it matches her the shape of her face. We're selecting everything outside, and what we're going to do is just decrease the sharpness. So we're actually decreasing the sharpness on these flowers in the foreground, and I might go in with a brush actually and add a little bit to these flowers right here. So let's go in with our brush, and with the brush on, this is going to be applying the same effect that we are adding to the radial filter to whatever we brush on. So these flowers, I think, should be a little bit out of focus. And that looks pretty good. If you want to duplicate the strength of that, you can just literally right-click and duplicate any sort of brush or adjustment that you've made. That one starts to look a little bit awkward. I think that looks more like a quick, easy filter that you would slap on with one of your apps on your phone, and it doesn't look that natural to me. So I'm going to delete that duplication. Next, I'm pretty much happy with this. I am just going to go to my tone curve and just increase the contrast just a little bit. Really make this photo pop like that. And maybe just add a little bit of vignetting. Super feathered, super subtle. Midpoint in just quite a bit. And that's looking pretty good. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. I'm happy with that. Yeah. I'm kind of impressed. It was kind of a quick job. All those brushes, I think, could have been a little bit slower. I'm just seeing if we add a little bit of warmth to this, what that looks like. Yeah, maybe adding a little bit of warmth actually is good. Not too much. Like that. Yeah, there we go. All right, I'm happy with this one. I don't know what you think, but I thought this came out pretty good. I can't wait to see what you do in your own edits. So as always, post them to the Photography and Friends group. And as always, post them on social media and tag us there. You can find all of the tags over at the link below on the Photography and Friends website. All right, look forward to seeing you in future editing challenges. And as always, have a beautiful day and keep living that creative life.